We'll just give it a couple of minutes because people are streaming in. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started shortly. People are streaming in. It's wonderful to see you all here tonight. Just give it another minute before we start. Partha, do you think I should start?
Yeah, I think you can start.
Okay. Well, good evening and good morning, depending on where you are in the world. It's a big day for us at Hindus for Human Rights today because we launched our brand new report about our recent trip to India, Prema Yatra, a pilgrimage of love. And Religion News Service today published our op-ed about it. And Scroll.in will be cross-publishing the same op-ed in just a few hours. So congratulations especially to Nikhil, who authored the op-ed and the report, and to all of us. So a warm welcome to all of our Hindus for Human Rights supporters who have made time to join us for our spring strategy briefing. We have promised to keep our call to within an hour, and we very much hope to keep our word. This is a private briefing for the generous people who make our work possible, all of you. You will hear the highlights of our advocacy efforts in the first quarter of this year, 2023, and our strategic plans forward. Before we get started, I would like to update you on some exciting changes in our staff team, and one very bittersweet one. In this month of April, we have welcomed 3 wonderful new people to our staff team, ready to take HfHR from strength to strength. We will hear today from David Kalal, Communications Director, Sahil M., our Education and Outreach Director, and Angelica Razak Francis, our Administrative Assistant. Our advisory board is growing also, with new members this month, India-based writer Apurvanand and US-based theologian Professor Anantanand Rambachan. And our sad update is that after more than 2 years of helping to steer and lead our beloved Hindus for Human Rights, our Deputy Executive Director, Nikhil Mandalaparthi, who started as HfHR's first full-time staff person, will be leaving HfHR to pursue new adventures. He will, of course, remain an integral part of our HfHR family, and he walks into his bright future with our love, blessings, and immense gratitude. I will ask all of our staff members, our newbies, David, Sahil, Angelica, and our seasoned and now senior staffers, Policy Director Ria and Communications and Outreach Coordinator Harita, to each say a brief word. And after we have heard from them, I invite Nikhil to take us into the next part of our briefing, the report back on our recent trip to India.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I'll go first. My name is Sahil. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm coming in as the Director of Education and Outreach. And I was really looking for a home where I could marry faith with activism. And I was really glad to find Hindus for Human Rights. And I'm so happy with the work we do. And I'm just really happy to be here. So in the spirit of keeping it brief, I'll now pass it over to the next person.
I believe the next person is me. The spirit of keeping it brief is very difficult for me. My name is David Kalal. I'm joining as the new communications director. I'm so excited to be here. This really brings together a long history of South Asian community activism that I've been doing in New York with a lot of work I've done in nonprofit branding and communications over the years. And being able to bring those passions together and coming into such a deeply political, intellectual, and energized space is just exciting beyond belief. It's been 2 weeks. I'm learning a great deal, and I'm excited for all the next stages that we're going to go to together. Brief.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angelica Razak Francis. I am the new administrative assistant for Hindus for Human Rights. I came to Hindus for Human Rights through Aminta Kilawan. I did a lot of work with her on South Coast Women's March, Jahaji Sisters. And as someone who's in the Caribbean, who's Muslim, I was really interested in the work that Hindus for Human Rights does. And I think it's really refreshing to see an organization like this that promotes like progressive Hinduism, especially, towards marginalized groups like, like Dalits and Muslims. So I'm really excited to be here.
Okay. Hi all, I'm Ria Chakraborty and I'm the policy director, guess now senior staff. I'm glad to be a part of Hindus for Human Rights, and this year has been amazing. And what I love about this organization is that it is a celebration of the great diversity of the Hindu American experience.
That leaves me. Hi, everyone. My name is Harita. I am the Communications and Outreach Coordinator for Hindus for Human Rights. And what I really love about this space is that it is an unapologetic Hindu voice for justice. And that is something that I've always searched for in my activism and advocacy. And especially as a young person, finding this place and this space has been really empowering for me. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all of our wonderful colleagues for introducing themselves. And I feel really grateful and lucky to be able to have worked with Ria and Harita, Sunita and Raj and the whole team in the last few years. And of course, to have a short but still wonderful overlap with David and Sahil and Angelica. And yeah, I feel really a lot of emotions, both bittersweet about transitioning out, but really proud of the work that we've done over the last couple of years. And just, I mean, looking at this screen, like it really hits home just how much HfHR has grown just in the last couple of years from when I joined and until now. So we have a full team and just really excited to see what this team accomplishes in the next, coming years. So I'm going to transition us to the next portion of our presentation today. Earlier this year, Sunita and I went to India for about 6 weeks, and we engaged in this trip that we're calling a Prema Yatra, or a pilgrimage of love. And so I'll share a little bit about just some of the highlights. As Sunita mentioned, we just published the report today. Religion News Service has covered it in an op-ed, and Scroll will be covering it as well. So please, check out those links as well and read it in more detail. But this is sort of a sneak peek highlights reel of our time in India. It was a really eye-opening, inspiring, depressing, just like all of the whole spectrum of emotion, but really, I think, a formative and important trip that'll guide our advocacy in the years to come. So to give a little bit of context, the one question that one may ask is, why go to India to begin with? As an organization, as you all know, we're based in the United States, and we have chapters in other countries across the South Asian diaspora. So given our position as a diaspora-based organization, why go to India and do an India trip? And this is rooted in a campaign that we launched last year, given a slew of different incidents of anti-Muslim hate and violence in India. We felt it was important as Hindus for Human Rights to convene Hindu religious leaders to put together a statement against Islamophobia, against the political ideology of Hindu nationalism. And so we drafted a short statement, about 500 words. We got dozens of Hindu temples and priests and religious leaders to sign on to the statement. And it was published in the Indian Express, cross-published in several other Indian news outlets in just about maybe almost exactly a year from today, last year. And so it got a bunch of press in India, but most of the endorsements, as you can see, came from outside of India. And so we had priests and temples from the US, from Afghanistan, from the Netherlands, across the diaspora, but very few names of Hindu religious leaders who were willing to sign on to something like this living in India. Really the only and the kind of the biggest example that we knew of was Swami Agnivesh, who was a guide for many of the early founders of Hindus for Human Rights. He passed away just a few years ago, and we've been issuing a memorial award in his name. But he's really, in modern times, one of the only Hindu religious leaders who has spoken out against religious nationalism and caste. And so we decided that we were not satisfied with this kind of status quo of a real reluctance from religious leaders in India. And so we decided to go there and find some open-minded and progressive Hindu leaders for ourselves, really asking in a very serious way, though, that this question of, in a country with, you know, nearly 1 billion Hindu population, where are the sort of fearless, moral, religious leaders who are speaking out against hate and violence and what we're seeing in the name of the Hindu tradition? So we engaged in a yatra that spanned both North and South India. We traveled across 9 states and 12 different cities and several villages around there as well. Over the course of basically from February 9th to March 6th of this year, we had nearly 30 face-to-face meetings with Hindu religious leaders, accompanied with also nearly 30 meetings with human rights defenders, students, and academics. Our trip took us to several important pilgrimage sites and religious sites in India, including Rishikesh, Haridwar, Ayodhya, Varanasi, as well as major cities like Trivandrum, Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, and a few other sites as well. Our itinerary was really guided by our grassroots partners in India. And so everyone that we met, all of the different religious leaders that we met on this journey, had been previously recommended to us by someone else, either a grassroots interfaith organization or a journalist or a different kind of NGO in India has told us, hey, there's this Swami or this priest that we know of who is concerned about the situation in the country today. You know, maybe they would be receptive to meeting with you. And so it was really in that fashion of getting kind of recommendations from all over, synthesizing it into an itinerary. It was a real adventure in many ways. And overall, there were some really inspiring moments and also some really difficult moments. And so in the remaining time, I'll just share some of the highlights and takeaways from what we heard from all of these religious leaders. So just to start off with some of the more difficult realities that we encountered on this trip, one of the biggest kind of shifts that we noticed was on the level of just terminology and the language that we use to talk about these issues. So as probably many of you are familiar with, we use the term Hindutva to refer to a very specific political ideology of Hindu nationalism articulated 100 years ago by Savarkar and other intellectuals. The term Hindutva in today's India, though, has a very different connotation from what we and other groups in the diaspora have been using. And so what we encountered in many of our conversations is that this word has really been successful. This has been a tactic of Hindu nationalists in the last several decades to convert this term from just a political ideology into a much larger cultural identity. And so today in India, we found that the word Hindutva really just has connotations of a strong, assertive Hindu, or a Hindu who fights back or stands up for themselves. And that's a really, really worrying development from our perspective, that the Hindu right has so successfully kind of obfuscated and concocted a totally different meaning for this term, which really emerges in a very specific sense of a political worldview. And so similarly, we also heard from many of our interlocutors, whether they were Hindu, Muslim, or belonging to other faiths, that the Hindu Rashtra, or the Hindu state that has been advocated for by Hindu nationalist groups, that India has sort of by default already become a Hindu state. And in many ways, this is due not just to the real lack of a strong opposition in India, political opposition, but also culturally, the level at which many Indian Hindus have just sort of imbibed the tenets of Hindu nationalism has led many people to just feel that, you know, the Hindu state is here, and this is the state of affairs in India today. Something that we encountered, which is perhaps not surprising to some of our Muslim friends on this call, but nevertheless we had to point it out, was just a really deep-rooted sense in our conversations with everyday Hindus and their religious leaders, a deep sense of like victimhood and resentment that was built on different sort of building blocks, whether it's grievances about history, medieval history, or more recent history, a sense of, really this is not unique to India, but this sense where a majority population feels like they're the ones under threat. And we see this, of course, in the United States and other countries as well. But a real sense of what we're calling Hindu resentment or Hindu victimhood that is inextricably intertwined with hatred towards Indian Muslims. And it was really just devastating to see the level of dehumanization of the Indian Muslim community that's taken place in the minds of not just many Indian Hindus, but their religious leaders. And so we have, for example, you know, conversations with various swamis or religious leaders where we're literally talking, you know, talking to them about these issues, and meanwhile people are streaming in and doing pranam, you know, touching their feet, and we're seeing just how much religious authority they have while they're in some cases spewing some very, very harmful and divisive rhetoric around India's Muslim community. At the same time, among even the progressive and open-minded leaders that we did find, and we did meet several really inspiring and wonderful religious leaders, we heard from them a really deep and pervasive sense of fear about speaking up and putting themselves on the line, whether that's speaking to media or even to their own communities. And there's a sense of reluctance that I don't want to put my temple at risk, or my disciples or devotees at risk, or my ashram at risk. And many of the people we had talked to had already faced violence from Hindu nationalist groups, whether it's the Bajrang Dal or RSS, you know, burning down their ashram or vandalizing their temple. There was a sense from many people that we talked to that I've already faced you know, some pushback from these groups. I don't feel safe yet, you know, speaking out, which was really disappointing and difficult to hear. And it was combined also with a sense of deep kind of loneliness and isolation. And a lot of these leaders just felt like whenever we would ask them, do you know any other progressive, open-minded, you know, Hindu leaders, a lot of them would say Swami Agnivesh, and, you know, he's not alive anymore. And so they really don't know about each other is what we realized. And so in our kind of follow-up work, it's also about creating a network for these like-minded, concerned Hindu religious leaders. So that's sort of the depressing side of the trip, but there was also a lot of reasons for hope and inspiration. I just put a few quotes from a few different religious leaders that we talked to. I won't read them out, you know, verbatim to all of you, but there were a whole lot of reasons and really strongly articulated positions of resistance to Hindu nationalism that we heard from many of the religious leaders that we talked to. And these ranged from swamis with ashrams to priests of individual temples and mahants of different temples, all the way down from, you know, very small temples to very prominent mutts or monasteries and monastic institutions. Many of the people that we talked to articulated their opposition to Hindu nationalism in explicitly religious terms, religious language, seeing this as a fight, you know, against adharma, for example. a lot of the people we talked to articulated the importance of mutual respect. So, for example, a priest we talked to in Ayodhya talking about the importance of, if there's a procession going past a mosque or vice versa, they should be respectful and quiet and not provocative, which is, of course, we saw the violence that's been happening around Ram Navami and Hanuman Jayanti the last few years. A lot of the religious leaders we talked to articulated their opposition to Hindu nationalism rooted in the very local context. And so, for example, in Varanasi, one of the most important religious sites for many Hindus, there was a crazy number of priests and religious leaders who were just furious with the BJP government for the sort of renovations that the Modi government had been enacting in the city to turn it into a tourist destination, demolishing many historical temples in the process, and really, in their views, sort of destroying the character of the city. And I remember specifically one priest talking to us about the way in which the BJP had really sort of warped the image of Kashi or Varanasi as a sacred city to Shiva, ignoring that Varanasi has importance for followers of Kabir and Ravidas, the Buddha, and it's a pluralistic city in itself. And so even from a Hindu perspective, there's a flattening, a homogenization that's happening. And this is true across the country. And we heard, for example, as well in South India, of resistance from temple committees and temple administrators when groups like Bajrang Dal have demanded that Muslim vendors be excluded from temple festivals, for example. There's again a real pushback and articulation of a position that says, who are you to sort of change our traditions that we've been doing for XYZ years? Again, pushing back against the Hindu rights claimed authority to sort of speak for all Hindus or to enact sort of the will of the Hindu community. Many of the leaders that we talked to shared about their efforts to sort of push back in subtle ways against the agenda of the Hindu right. For example, just by keeping their temples open to everyone, not having a restriction based on religion or caste or gender of who can come in. Various temple priests and leaders we talked to also talked about inviting artists from different religious communities to perform in their temple space, again, sort of marking it as a welcoming and diverse community space. And we also did notice, of course, and this is probably obvious for many people, but many of the religious leaders in non-BJP ruled states felt much safer in being able to articulate public positions against the BJP, RSS, and other Hindu nationalist groups. So this is just, again, a really quick kind of bird's eye view of what we discovered in India, all of the sort of conversations we have. Everything is much more kind of discussed in depth in the report. We also have a section of very concrete takeaways of how this trip will inform our advocacy moving forward. So please take a look at that report. But overall, this was a really incredible experience for both positive and negative ways. I feel really just inspired and validated. I think that's the biggest feeling, is just that throughout this trip, whether it was religious leaders or people that, human rights activists that we met, there was a real sense of, the work that Hindus for Human Rights is doing, especially in the diaspora, is so critical and so needed. And their efforts to start building similar infrastructure in India among different collectives and volunteers that have independently sort of started this process, but they're really looking to the work of Hindus for Human Rights as an inspiration. So I will just stop here, but I'll pass it to Sunita if there's anything else you want to add about our takeaways from the trip.
Thank you, Nikhil. That was a wonderful report back from our trip. It was a wonderful experience for me to travel with you, Nikhil. Unforgettable few weeks going from village to village, traveling with you. Thank you for the friendship and the experience. My two biggest takeaways from the trip were, the word validation sums it up. One, like you said, was validation of our work. Pretty much everyone we met, whether they were activists or religious leaders, everyone that we met who was concerned about Indian democracy, because we met people that thought everything was okay. I'm not talking about those people, but the folks who are more aligned with us, everyone without exception told us that HfHR's work is critical and needs to grow. And many people asked us if we were building HfHR in India. And secular activists in particular that we met, each one of them were moved and said, wow, you've come all the way from America for a pilgrimage like this. So that validation means a lot to us. And, it puts air in and wind in our sails so that we can keep going forward. But there was also a darker validation. And that's the validation in the face of the regular accusation that we are exaggerating things in India. We often hear that in the community, that this is nonsense, everything's okay in India, we're just exaggerating. There's a few unrelated ad hoc events that happen anywhere in the world, there's nothing wrong. Well, this trip confirmed to us that India is not headed to becoming a Hindu Rashtra, it is one pretty much. From the moment we landed, everything we saw, the G20 branding that's in every village and every town and every city that we went to, these larger than life billboards of Modi and Yogi, and the Hindu iconography everywhere it was impossible to miss. The last time I was in India, and you too, Nikhil, I think we were both there 3 years ago and we both talked about how drastically things have changed in those 3 years. So along with the changes that were visible, the other change was the fear. And so ordinary people that we met and activists and religious leaders, the theme connecting everything they told us was how dangerous it is to speak up about politics, how dangerous it is to speak up against the government. Some people are brave enough to do it anyway and take the risk, and many people aren't ready to do so. But the fear, the acknowledgement of the risk was there throughout. And I should say that that's why we, in our report and in the report back that Nikhil gave, we haven't mentioned the names of the Hindu religious leaders that we met. We're keeping their names confidential for their own safety. And just know that in the background, we are connecting them to each other, and the network of progressive, love-speaking Hindu religious leaders is growing, and please take hope from that as we do. The mission of our trip was to identify Hindu religious leaders who speak of love, not hate. I mean, the bar wasn't that high when you think of it. And to connect them to each other so that they can grow as a force. All of us who are advocates, working in religious spaces, secular spaces, all of us advocating for human rights in India, we will not be successful until there are Hindus opposing Hindutva in great numbers. And if there isn't a network of Hindu religious leaders with religious authority willing to take a stand, religious leaders who are living today and ready to bravely carry on the legacy of the likes of our beloved Swami Agnivesh. We made a small start on this trip, and whereas we had pretty much zero going into India, we now have a list of 15. It's small or huge, depending on how you look at it. Religious leaders, Hindu religious leaders who are aligned with us. It's a beautiful start. And with your support, we will keep building. Thank you, everyone.
Great. So I think before we open up for discussion and Q&A, we have a few updates from Ria and Raju. So Ria, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Nikhil. So in 2023, as you heard from Nikhil and Sunita, it's been a huge year for us already. We're transforming our advocacy from increasing awareness to taking action on the issues we care about. So we have 3 buckets of policy work: our state and local advocacy, our national messaging on progressive Hindu Americans, and our foreign policy work. We've already helped pass 1 bill in Seattle, introduced another at the federal level, and are currently working on 6 different legislative pushes. We've written 6 op-eds and have been mentioned in 67 outlets. At the state and local level, we want to energize our grassroots supporters. We've been active in the fight to combat caste discrimination in California and Seattle, and have mobilized our community in support of legislation to ban caste discrimination in both places. We won in Seattle, and Councilwoman Shama Sawant mentioned our board member in her own comments. And we're also part of a larger coalition in California, currently fighting for the first state-level bill to combat caste discrimination. We want lawmakers to turn to us for a progressive Hindu voice. So Sunita and I met with our advocacy partners and local lawmakers in New York for 1 week in March. During that week, we noticed the dire need for progressive Hindu voices to be organized and to show up at events. Policymakers that we met wanted us in the room, but we don't always have the capacity to be everywhere all at once. So that's why we would like to hire a grassroots organizer first in New York, and then hopefully replicate that in California, Texas, and beyond. We also want to position ourselves as the national progressive Hindu voice. We've already provided feedback and supported a bill to make Diwali a federal holiday. And we've joined organizations like Planned Parenthood, the National Council of Jewish Women, and other pro-choice faith-based organizations to protest the overturning of Roe versus Wade and current rulings to ban the use of mifepristone for abortion and miscarriage management. We also joined in amicus briefs in Georgia, Florida, and Indiana to overturn abortion bans in all 3 states. Finally, we're part of a large coalition to combat Islamophobia in the US and combat the rise of Hindu nationalism in the US. And then in our foreign policy work, we've asked lawmakers to include language in the 2024 spending bill to force the State Department to report back to Congress about human rights in India before the White House gives any military assistance to India. And we plan to work with many of these same lawmakers to make a similar contribution in the 2024 defense bill. This is the largest military bill in the world. We continue to push the State Department to use existing US laws to sanction individuals who have committed human rights violations in India. And as Modi is planning to visit the US, we are asking members of Congress to help us robustly criticize this visit to DC and shine a light on human rights issues in India under Modi, including through protests, press conferences, and legislation. We want to make this visit as uncomfortable for Modi and Biden as possible. For us, this is an opportunity to change the White House's narrative on India. Finally, we are looking to increase our work to advocate for Hindus outside of India, where they may be persecuted because of their faith. We've already done this year by writing a letter to the Pakistan ambassador to the US about rising violence against religious minorities, and we hope to build on this work throughout the year. This has been a real year so far of maturation for our organization's advocacy. I'm glad to say that we are being taken seriously across the country and the world.
Thank you, Ria. Let's go to Raju now. Raju, you can share your screen.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Ria, and thank you, Nikhil. I just want to touch on something that's been happening on the West Coast that I'm involved in. For a long time, we were told by our own supporters that we have to find ways of engaging the opponents, engaging people who hold a different view, engaging people that are Modi supporters. During COVID, of course, that was well nigh impossible. But as soon as COVID was over, we thought of a way of engaging, at least in the Silicon Valley, where there are quite Hindu supporters are quite influential. So one of the ways we are engaging with our opponents is a series of conversations called Desh Videsh conversations. And speaking across the divide. It tells it like it is. We have a huge divide in the community, and we must begin to speak to one another, notwithstanding Zoom, which has allowed all of us to stay in our own echo chambers. So we've had 4 conversations so far. It's for third Saturday of each month. First one was on the Citizenship Amendment Act. Second one was on the UAPA. Third one was Untold Voices from Kashmir. And just last week, we talked about caste reservations and their repercussions in the diaspora. So we'll continue to do that. Just in terms of the thought process, the idea is not, we're not a neutral party. We do hold very strong views on some of these topics. But what we do that's different is we allow everybody to come into the meeting as long as they promise to observe rules of civil engagement and ask questions and allocate plenty of time to answer some of the difficult questions that come from some of the opponents of our work. So it's been fairly successful and has been rated well by those who have attended. And we'll continue to do that. Just to give you an idea, there's some of the topics we are talking about in the next few months. One is the interaction, how Zionism and Hindu nationalism are learning from one another and teaching one another. The history textbooks, which has come into a lot of attention recently in India and will do so again in California. That's one of the topics. The third topic that people are interested in is go back to history, to many of our progressive Hindu leaders of the past, whether it's Basavanna, Rakamahadevi, Kabir, Narayana Guru. And I think this is a part of history that many people seem to forget. And we need to remind them that Hindus for Human Rights is not the first organization to be doing what we're doing, opposing caste vociferously. Some of our past generations have tried that, and we can learn from what worked for them, what didn't work for them. So those are some of the things we are thinking about. The other area that we are involved in more because of the way things have gone is in terms of actively advocating for banning caste discrimination. Since California is a bellwether state and it's now up for the California legislature to pass a law, we are partnering with several Dalit organizations who are taking the lead, and we feel our job is to support them in their effort to ensure that caste gets on as a category of discrimination, potential discrimination under our civil rights laws. We are encountering tremendous resistance to this with the argument that somehow it makes every Hindu immediately suspect, forgetting that many of the Hindus may be actually Dalits who are experiencing caste discrimination. So it is putting us face to face across the divide. And I think we can learn from it, and hopefully we will have some victories along the way. And once California passes such a law, I'm sure many other states will follow suit, and perhaps eventually at a national level, there may be consideration for the Civil Rights Act to include caste as a category. Thank you. Those are the two things I'm doing, and let you go right now to Q&A.
Thank you, Raju. So we have been really good on time. So I think we can have a good 15 minutes or so of Q&A. If you could please, if you have questions or comments, make them brief. If they're targeted to any one member of our team, let us know. And then team members, Raju, Nikhil, Ria, and everybody on Haritha, and even our new staff members, if you would like to answer, just jump in or raise your hand. And you can either, Haritha, can people unmute themselves, or do they need to type in their question?
No, they can unmute themselves.
Okay, so you can unmute and ask your question. Please make it, don't make it a very long one, so more people can also speak.
Hi, Can you hear me? This is Sapna Gupta from Tempe, Arizona. Thank you for having this meeting, and such a pleasure to see Raju Rajagopal and Rashid Ahmed on this call. I know them from my time in Chicago in the early 2000s when we were working on the ban on trying to prevent Modi from having a visa here. My question is these Desh Videsh discussions, how were the invitations issued? Was it done via friends of friends? Is there a model that can be used for other locations? Is it done through personal contacts?
Sapna, hello. Long time since I saw you. This is a very open invitation. We posted on social media sites, allowing people either to come in person to the meeting in Silicon Valley or log on Zoom. So they do have those two options. And our challenge has been, of course, to make sure that people do come to the in-person meeting, because that's what we're trying to encourage, being in the same room with people with different ideas. And it's been fairly good so far. If the topic is controversial enough and people do recognize that we will give a chance for the opponents to ask questions politely and answer them politely, I think more and more people will show up. So it's open invitation, smaller gathering in person, and a larger gathering on Zoom. And anybody can register. We have not tried to keep anybody out, but when they register, they do sign a code of conduct for the meeting. And we do have a security person in the room. So if anybody violates or is abusive in their behavior, we will immediately get them out. I think that's worked very effectively to keep some of the intruders out.
And Sapna, I'll add that now that we have Sahil on our team, who's also based in the Bay Area, we are going to work really hard on outreach so that we can bring folks into the room who, aren't already entrenched in one view or another, and we can start to actually have, dialogue and start to shift people. At least that's our hope. And we're going to give it a really good try with Sahil's efforts. Any other question from our friends and supporters? Syedji, your hand.
Thank you. Yes. So in one of your earlier slides, you basically noted that it was alarming to see how Muslims in India have been characterized as violent. I don't exactly remember the language you used. We can revisit the slide and look at that. So my thought is that the reason behind that attitude needs to be examined and not dismissed as saying it's untrue. I mean, we can all among us agree that that is untrue, but there must be some energy put into asking, what is the grain of truth that has led to this position, so that we as Hindus for Human Rights can develop an antidote for that grain, because that's the most dangerous thing that is happening in India today. The other thought, again, is in that grain, how much of the extremism outside India among the Islamic community projected onto the Indian Muslims, and what kind of message needs to be developed to counter that. So I'll stop here. I don't know that there is a question, but certainly a suggestion there that we need to discuss it very seriously.
Sayedji,
Yeah.
I will respond briefly.
I also had thoughts on that too.
Yeah, and then folks in the room
Yeah.
can also speak to what you have raised, which is very, very important. If we dismiss somebody's anxiety or fear as just invalid, then there's no chance of them, you know, of engaging with them or them listening to you. If you've written them off, then there's nothing to be said. And so what you're saying is absolutely correct. It's also incredibly difficult when we are so committed to a position that we feel is correct. It's a very difficult thing. But I personally, in my own life, have I had a glimpse of it. And so I'll just share, it's very personal. But this time when Nikhil and I were in Kashi, in Varanasi, we decided not to go into the Kashi Vishwanath temple. We went all the way there and we were going to go in. Nikhil hasn't been to it to visit the temple. And yet when we got to what they call the corridor and we saw how commercialized the area has become. And then when we saw this big wall that they have built, which is like a fortress, you can't even see the temple. It's like a big wall right in front of the gate. We had no desire to go in. There was nothing about it that felt spiritual. So this time we didn't go. But on previous trips, I have been inside the Kashi Vishwanath temple. And when people, I don't feel this, but when I encounter somebody talking about the violence, you know, that is intrinsic among Muslims, and of course they have been fed terrible messages, you know, about this, and a lot of it is rooted in history, and I don't agree with any of it. But on my visit to the Kashi Vishwanath temple, you will see, if you go there, you will see a Nandi. The Nandi is the bull that faces the god. In Kashi Vishwanath temple, Nandi faces Shiva. In this temple, the Nandi faces what is the wall of the mosque. I can understand that people in my family, when they see that, will be filled with emotions, all kinds. And that is a place that I tap into to have something like understanding or empathy with where they're coming from, because I have to find that in order to talk to them, hear them, understand them. And so I just share that with a view to and agree with the spirit of what you have raised. And then I think that what Nikhil and Ria especially talked about, which is looking at the plight of minorities in neighboring countries to India, whether it's Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, you know, applying the same human rights values and solidarity with minorities who are oppressed is a very important part of our mission. We are so focused on India that I don't think we do enough in that area, but we are committed to speaking up for human rights of everyone anywhere, and certainly of Hindu, Sikh, and other minorities in other countries. But let me stop, and many hands are up.
Yeah.
I think Angelica had
Yeah, no, because
comment.
sorry, I was really interested in that question. Hi, so when you said you were talking about we kind of dismiss it, like that's not true, like, you know, we shouldn't, that Muslims are dangerous, like we need to, you know, interrogate the question of to like how do we get to the point where we think that Muslims are dangerous? Am I correct? And that was the question. And it made me think about this article that I forgot what it was called, but it was an article that talking about like Osama bin Laden and the Taliban and how he was like claimed as like a hero in America. Oh, this is Angelica speaking. Hi. And you know, he was considered, like the Taliban was considered like and Osama bin Laden was considered a hero at one point, and now the narrative has completely shifted to, you know, like Muslims and everything being so dangerous. And I feel like it's worth exploring and worth discussing and worth looking into how that propaganda is used, how that propaganda is used, and to what ends it's used, and like why it's being used to target specific groups. Because for me personally, I feel like throughout my whole life, I feel like the narrative has always been that Muslims are dangerous, but at various points, it's been Japanese or Jewish or German or whatever. But I think looking into like the way propaganda is used and why it's used to target specific groups, I think that's something that's worth interrogating. Also, I don't know if that answers. That's just a thought that popped into my head when you asked that. Sorry, it may not answer anything, but yeah.
Let's go. Who Raju, did you want to say something?
Thank you, Syed, for that important question. I'll just make a couple of points. One is we try to counter some of the impressions where we have facts and figures to counter some of the myths that are being spread widely. One of them, of course, is the growth rate of Muslims keeps increasing. There is no basis for that at all. So we're hoping that some people will be persuaded by presenting reliable, factual information. That's one way we can counter the general feelings, often not based on facts. The second thing that I have personally learned is there's absolutely no sense in arguing about history. Our history as a country started in 1947, and we made a compact among all the communities, and that's what we have been lived by for 75 years. And let's talk about the future. What do you want for the future children of India? Do you want a divided country forever, like Lebanon or Afghanistan? Isn't that what some of the ideas of Hindu Rashtra are leading to? So have them think about future generations are the two things that I would really feel. This is not like avoiding things, but rather to say there is absolutely no way we can argue about history, and it just simply distracts from the real issue is what kind of society do they want their grandchildren to live in.
Let me take one more comment on this before going to another. I know you have many hands, but we want other people to also be able to. Let's see. Ria, do you want to? Well, you've already spoken. How about Shashank?
Namaskar, everybody. So thank you for this presentation. I wish I could have logged on earlier and been more attentive. I was unfortunately walking home, but I guess like a question I had specifically about the Desh Videsh series, and like as a person who's also.
Shashank, is your comment on this on Syed Bhai's point?
Oh no, it isn't. I'm so sorry.
Is there anybody who would like to? Shall we just move on to another question? We can actually. Yes, go ahead, Shashank. Go ahead.
Yeah. So my question was kind of about the Desh Videsh series, and really because as a person who's like from the Bay Area and has like noticed sort of increasingly visible political polarization in Indian American families, particularly Hindu families. I'm curious to what extent your outreach has like extended to the temple space, because that's a big area of concern for me as a person who like works very close to like chaplains and sort of community leaders. Like, do you think that your project could extend to members of the temple space, even if it doesn't take place within like a temple setting? Do you think like you would be open in the future to inviting temple leaders and having them be a part of this conversation? Like, do you think that would be helpful, I guess?
Yeah.
And everyone should know that Shashank is part of Sadhana.
Yes. Hello, everybody.
which is an organization, a sister organization that does exactly that. But who would like to answer, Shashank? Nikhil, would you?
I think Raju had started.
Raju had? Okay.
Oh yeah, I think there's no clear pathway to where we end up. Obviously, we've started with this idea of having a panel that are generally thinking alike and allowing the audience to question them or cross-examine them, and let's how it goes. We are not limiting anybody. it would be great at some point temple leaders could participate, and but perhaps the next one of the three conversations that I mentioned is talking about progressive Hinduism of past years. We could perhaps have a Hindu leader participate in that. So beyond that, we'll just have to see how successful it is. At this point, we are simply getting over the fear that we're going to eat each other alive by being in the same room. And we need to get over that. Instead, eat samosas together.
So Shashank, you know, the whole mission of our trip to India was specifically to engage Hindu religious leaders. And we had a number of temple leaders sign our anti-hate statement outside India and a few inside India. So that shows our openness to engage Hindu religious leaders, particularly temple leaders. And in the 3 years of HfHR, we have focused on political advocacy and media advocacy. And 2023 has been the year that we have committed to doing base building, community organizing in a really, taking a deep dive and really going into the community. And that does include campuses, university campuses, and temples. And so from me, the answer is yes. But it's such a important piece of the work, such a critical piece of the work, that my dream is that sadhana increases its capacity to really lead in that, mobilization within the religious space. So I hope we can continue talking, Shashank, but I hope that answers your question.
No, thank you so much.
We have not much time left, and we have one person's hand up, Amin Bhai. Amin Bhai, will you ask your question, and we'll try and answer it quickly so that I can then wrap up and let you all go. It's almost the hour. Amin Ahmed.
Hi.
Hi.
My apologies. I'm using this for the first time on my iPhone. Sorry about that. Okay, I would just like to make a quick comment about what Syed Shahid and Raju sir spoke about, and also something that was mentioned in the original presentation by Nikhil. This is, the sense of being wrong historically. I firmly believe that we need to have a pushback using primary sources and also contemporary writings against this narrative that only Muslim rulers were violent. We need to have historians on board, because I do a bit of reading and also have written few essays on history. And as a student of Indian history, I believe India is a history of many histories. We are a nation of many histories. For example, I have written quite a bit about the Maratha invasions of South India, of Karnataka. And if you look at that, the victims were always Hindus. And it changed the history, it changed the language, the Kannada language itself was changed by these invasions. In that sense, I think closing our eyes to what's being said about history, I don't think it'll serve the purpose, because that's how we are at a stage where the textbooks are being changed, where 400 years of history of the Mughals has been erased, and one fine morning we'll wake up and say these people, 200 million Muslims dropped from the sky. How did they come? They came from through some way, and this is the way. So we need to engage them instead of avoiding, disengaging rather. Yeah, thank you.
Agree with you completely, Amin Bhai. Thank you for your comment. It is 9:29, and so it falls to me to wrap us up, and thank you all for supporting us and for being here tonight. And we will be sending the recording to good friends who were not able to make it tonight. I need to end on a pitch for Hindus for Human Rights, extremely important and urgent work. Our current budget in Hindus for Human Rights is just around $400,000, but we aspire to double that in 2023 with your help. We feel an urgent need to recruit, as Ria mentioned, regional HfHR coordinators, whether it's in New York. So basically in the West Coast, the Midwest and the East Coast, we would like to have staff capacity. And we are slowly building our chapters in Australia, Canada, and the UK and beyond. There's been mention of Singapore needing a chapter and Guyana. To ramp up these efforts, we will need staff capacity in these regions. And even if we manage to increase our budget to 800,000, it is just around a quarter of the budget of the largest Hindu organization in the US, one which you all know, one which is aligned with Hindu nationalism, and one which will obstruct our work at every turn. In 2022, we began, thanks to the help of our team members, Preeti and Kristen, we have begun building solid relationships with major funders, some of whom are here today in today's briefing. In 2023, we hope to transform some of these initial beginning relationships into funding partnerships so that our work is resourced and sustainable. While such institutional support from foundations is in the works, it takes time. And so I urge every one of you who is here with us today at the briefing to support our work as much as you can. I know you already support us. I'm asking you to support us more. We would ideally like to raise at least half of our desired budget increase through individual donations and small grants. As you can see, the political urgency for this work continues to grow in full throttle, but also HfHR is growing. We're growing significantly thanks to all of you. If you can each go the extra mile for us, now is the best time to do that. Many organizations run aggressive fundraising campaigns. Number one, we cannot afford to do that. And two, our work speaks for itself. We've made impressive strides, as you saw from everything you heard in today's briefing. We hope, and I really ask each one of you attending this briefing to help our work grow in whatever capacity you can. If you're an annual supporter, think of becoming a monthly donor. If you're able to, please increase your level of support or frequency of support. If you have contacts in foundations, please connect us. If you have contacts who have enough, who are wealthy, affluent, please connect us. And I think each of you can do this. Can you each recruit at least, I ask this of every one of you here, please, each of you recruit at least 5 people from your network of contacts, or especially if you're South Asian, your extended family, to join the HfHR community. Please, if each one of you can do that, it would be huge for us. In addition to this briefing, we will have events coming up, hopefully a virtual comedy benefit in July and a gala in December. If you can help with our events, join our host committee, please let me know. You know where to reach me. And we're still selling our gorgeous 2023 calendars. If you have any events coming up or family occasions, you could buy them as gifts. It's still only April. And most importantly, please stay connected with us, read our newsletters, and be with us, and let us know you're with us for the long haul. We need your support as we continue to work day in, day out to oppose Hindu nationalism and caste from within the Hindu fold. Thank you all for being here, and good night, and have a wonderful day if you're in India.